Hi, welcome everyone. I am Amanda Fox, Director of Communications for North America for American University of Beirut, and I am thrilled to welcome you to Migration, Integration, and Diplomacy, the Rich History of Lebanon-Mexico Relations. Before we get started, I just wanted to share a few quick notes to make sure everyone has a smooth and accessible experience. Closed captioning is available for this session, so you can turn your captions on or off by clicking the CC or Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Note that the webinar is being recorded and a recording will be shared with all registered participants after the event and published online. And if you experience any technical issues, please reach out using the Q&A box or chat, and our team will do our best to assist you. Finally, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom window, to submit questions for the panelists at any time during the session, and then we will address as many as we can toward the end of the discussion. So let's get started. This discussion is held in honor of the recent celebrated anniversary of 80 years of Mexico-Lebanon diplomatic relations and 100 years relationship between the American University of Beirut, or AUB, and Mexico. Our esteemed panelists, however, are going to go back even further and discuss the origins and impact of Lebanese migration to Mexico that began almost 150 years ago. So let me introduce you to our panelists. Caroline Chalouhi Brennan is coming to us, Chalouhi Brennan is coming to us today from AUB's new Latin America office, which was founded as part of our recently expanded Latin American initiative under AUB's President Khouri's global vision for the university. Caroline is Director of Advancement for Latin America, reporting to Dr. Imad Balbaki, VP of Advancement, and she leads alumni engagement, donor relations, and fundraising efforts across the region with a special focus on the Lebanese diaspora. A proud AUB graduate, her work with the university began in 1999, and her 20-plus years experience in communications, public relations, and fundraising has included work with U.S. embassies, multinational companies, NGOs, and diplomatic organizations. Welcome, Caroline. Enrique Gómez Montiel is the coordinator of the Middle East and Central Asia at the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs and is a career diplomat with over 20 years experience. He has served in many different geographical areas, such as the European and Middle East divisions at the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in the embassies of Mexico in Belgium, Luxembourg, and Haiti, and at the Mexican consulate in Tucson, Arizona. Welcome, Enrique. And finally, Martha Trabulse El Khouri is the director of the Lebanese Archive in Mexico, as well as the Mexican Lebanese Cultural Institute. During the last 15 years, her mission has been promoting Lebanese culture and preserving the memories of the diaspora in Mexico, as well as all over Latin America. And she wants everyone to know she's completely engaged with Lebanese and Mexican culture and enjoys making the world know about them. So we're thrilled to have you, Martha. So to kick you off, let me just set the scene. Lebanese immigration to Mexico began en masse in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with the earliest immigrants arriving between 1880 and 1910, when thousands fled the Ottoman Empire's instability and economic hardship. These members of the Lebanese diaspora eventually established influential communities and contributed significantly to Mexican culture and the economy, which is why we're all here today. So Martha, my first question is for you, and then I'd love for our panelists to chime in. Can you tell us a bit more about what motivated this mass migration back then and why Mexico?
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here. And look, in the 19th century, Lebanon suffered under the Ottoman yoke, and there was no promising future offered for the Lebanese. They were in really harsh situations. The religious communities, like, as you know, in Lebanon, or maybe if you don't know, in Lebanon, there is a very wide variety of religious communities, and they were pit. And the Jews and the Christians were massacred. So there was a very harsh situation over there. And the Ottoman yoke was not promising or letting them see a dignified future, either in economics or maybe in education or anything for their kids, their families. It was a very harsh situation. There were a lot of conflicts, and the religion tensions were exacerbated, and the structure of the country was undermined. It didn't work for them. So it was a deplorable situation for them. So they were some brave that decided, because they have two options. So they live under the yoke and suffered, or they emigrate. So the first immigrants, they emigrate, they took that opportunity, and they fled and left their country suffering. I mean, just imagine that you have to leave your family, because sometimes families couldn't go together, all of them. So they have to leave the country, and they really have the desire to achieve real opportunities, to have education for their kids, to have a dignified future free from oppression, from fear. They couldn't sleep. I mean, there is a phrase that is used in many talks of immigration. And my father, he wrote a theater play, and it was El Vuelo, which is the flight. And there is a phrase that I really love, which is asked, because I mean, Lebanon is a wonderful country. It's one of the best I have ever known. And the people and everything is wonderful there. But there was a grandson or a granddaughter, I don't know, but she or he asked the grandparent, if it's such a beautiful and wonderful country, why did you leave it? And this person answers, I leave it because I wanted you to sleep calmly, to have a good future. So it was really difficult for them, but there were really difficult situations over there, and they didn't have security or education or a promising future. So that was why they left the country. And to answer the question about why Mexico, I mean, they heard many legends about America and the sweet dream of America, the American dream. So some of them, they left the country, and they sought to get to the United States. But sometimes they stopped here in Mexico first, and they liked the country. And some of them were living in the United States, and there was a difficult situation over there. So it's the border. So they crossed the border and arrived to Mexico. Here in Mexico, the politics were friendlier, and there was many persons that have arrived here. And sometimes, for example, there was a very, very famous character in the emigration, which is who is named Domingo Curi, and he received the immigrants. He received them, and he asked, "Ente menwan, no? Where are you from?" In Lebanese and in Arabic. And they answered, I mean, from Rahbe, no? Men Rahbe, or Men Bet Meled, Men Farhuna, all of the towns in Lebanon. And he said, okay, some of your paisanos have arrived, and they are the ones from Rahbe have gone to Veracruz or Yucatan or Mexico City. The biggest immigrants, the biggest quantity of immigrants, they went to Mexico City, and they had a good life. They found a country that in many ways is like Lebanon, and the people is just like Lebanese people. So they felt like a good way to find their way to their future, and a good place to live with their families.
That's so interesting. And well, before I say anything, Enrique, do you have anything to add to what Martha just said?
Well, it's interesting, but what she says in the 19th century during the Ottoman times, there was also another problem, which was between minorities in Lebanon, and the authorities that held the power in the Mount Lebanon area were the Druze communities. And as she said, the Christian and Jewish communities in that area were minorities that had to stand some difficulties there. And in many cases, they wanted to migrate to Europe or to North America. And some of them ended up somewhere in Latin America, either in Mexico, in Brazil, in Cuba, in Venezuela. And they started this movement of migration that went on with through networks of Lebanese immigrants, and that facilitated somehow their arrival in these new areas, in these new countries.
So once some people settled successfully, then it became sort of a path and they helped other people follow.
Absolutely.
Um, Enrique, can you talk a little bit about the politics of the Mexican government during that time? How were the Lebanese immigrants received? And I know we're talking about a broad period of time, so you can tell me what period of time you're focused on.
Okay. Well, you talk about the beginning of the Lebanese migration to
Yes.
Mexico, and we have to understand that Mexico in the 19th century was in a turmoil. Mexico became independent, and then a series of civil wars and wars with the US, with France, led to a complete turmoil. But in the late 19th century, there was a president that remained in power for over 30 years, Porfirio Díaz. And during this time, uh, there was a relative calm. After all the conflicts that went on during the 19th century, he wanted to industrialize the country and modernize it. So it was a period where the railroads, where roads, where breweries, industry, mining flourished in Mexico. And in that regard, Diaz wanted to also increase the population of Mexico. By 1900, Mexico only had about 13.5 million people, inhabitants. So it was a very reduced number of people for such a large area. And in that regard, he wanted to privilege immigration to Mexico. He wanted people, especially from Western Europe, to migrate to Mexico. And a large number of Spaniards came here. And at that time, as Martha said, there was this large number of people leaving Lebanon and leaving the Middle East. And there was a number of them that started migrating to Mexico. But the characteristic was that most of them were Christians. If we see at that time, Muslim Lebanese immigrants or immigrants from Iraq, Jordan, Palestine were lesser numbers, but the Christians from the Mount Lebanon area were the largest number of immigrants from that geographical area, from the Middle East. And at the beginning, there was some mistrust by the Mexican authorities and Mexican population, but they soon actually started trusting these immigrants because, first of all, they were Christian, so they had some of the same traditional religious backgrounds, even though Maronites were not exactly the same, didn't follow exactly the same rite as Roman Catholic ones, but still they were part of the same religion, and that facilitated the integration. Second, the Mexican government limited land ownership, and those immigrants were not focused on agricultural activities, and they were not factory workers either, which were two areas in which the Mexican population, the Mexican majorities, were actually working. So that actually facilitated the integration and the migration of these Lebanese people, because on the one hand, they didn't actually take the jobs, let's say it that way, from factories or working workers that were Mexican lower classes. And second, they were not actually claiming land ownership for agricultural activities as most Mexican peasants. So that didn't interfere with what the Mexican government would actually fear from immigrants. And on the other hand, you have to remember that the Mexican government also tried to facilitate the flows of immigrants after the independence. And there had been an experience that the Mexican government didn't want to repeat. and that was the case of Texas. That at the beginning, many immigrants from the American colonies or from other areas actually populated Texas, and they favored slavery and some other activities that clashed with the Mexican Republic. So in that regard, the Lebanese immigrants did not represent a secessionist or a movement that clashed with the Mexican policies. And in that regard, that was seen as something that was not controversial. Besides that American experience with the Texan movement, that's why they wanted to facilitate immigration flows from Europe or from other areas that did not have the same background as the Texan movements and so on. So that gives us a bit of a context of what was happening in the late 19th century in Mexico.
So these policies were very much intended to try to make this as smooth as possible, looking to other historical examples of when there was a clash.
Absolutely. And they also wanted skilled labor that came to Mexico because, as I was saying, at the time, Mexico sought an industrialization. It was like the Mexican Industrial Revolution, if we say it that way. And in that regard, they sought, as I mentioned, Western European immigrants. But between those flows, there were the Lebanese ones who actually at the beginning focused on trade, which was something that was very welcome here. And there was a difference between European traders and Lebanese traders. The Mexican society, during that period, there was the high classes that were buying goods at big stores. And those ones were actually owned by French immigrants or European ones. But on the other hand, there were the Lebanese immigrants that were selling products. They were like itinerary vendors that were traveling from town to town, selling their products and selling them on credit, which was something new and innovative in the Mexican society. Because instead of paying upfront for the products, these guys were selling products, but receiving payments every month for what they were selling. And that facilitated the acquisition of products by the Mexican middle and lower classes. So that actually meant that the Lebanese, or the Turks, as they were actually called at the time, were actually more progressively accepted by the masses in Mexico, because they facilitated trade for them and they facilitated the acquisition of products and clothes and other stuff by these people.
So that speaks to the economic impact that the Lebanese immigrants had on the country, and I want to get to that in a second. But before I do that, it sounds like there was a lot of intentionality around making sure that things went smoothly. Martha or anyone, if you have any thoughts on how did it go? Were the people accepting of the Lebanese immigrants, and did it go as smoothly as the government hoped?
Look, well, Enrique just talked about the economic impact. I'm not gonna go over there because we'll talk about it later. But they were accepted, and for them, I mean, we know all of the stories because it's really nice that our grandparents, they told everything, and we know that they were accepted. They were really nervous, for example, because of the language. The language was a big issue for them because Arabic, even though in Spanish there are several words that come from Arabic. For example, aceituna, olive, aceituna, it's zaitun, or there are several words. They were nervous about being accepted. I mean, Mexico has wonderful people, and they were arms wide open for Mexicans, as Enrique said, because they didn't represent like a threat for them. But for example, there was some time over there when they were already establishing some businesses after being itinerant vendors that other immigrant communities felt threatened. So they started like talking about some things like the Lebanese did this and the Lebanese did that. And it was really hard for us, for our community, to clean that image. But the good relationship with the Mexican government helped that, and the good intentions and the fame that the Lebanese have created for them helped them for that. So yes, it was smooth. Mexico received Lebanese people very good. And I mean, you can see as the time has passed, we are a community, a big community established already here. And I mean, I'm really happy, and I can say that the country that received us, well, I'm Mexican, I was born here, but for my grandparents and everything, that they came from Lebanon, they felt really Mexican because they were very welcomed here.
One more thing is, as
Yes,
Martha
please.
was saying, some other communities that felt threatened started spreading rumors that the Turks, as they were called, were dirty people spreading diseases and that kind of stuff. That was not true. And there is something else that I would like to add. And we talked about the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th. But then the Mexican Revolution came in 1910. And again, an armed struggle came to the country. Some Lebanese fought in the revolution, some others didn't. But again, Mexico went into a civil war that ended up in 1920, more or less. And unfortunately, after the Mexican Revolution, there was a nationalistic movement in Mexico. And the policies that before welcomed immigrants became more restrictive at that time. So that means that the openness in which Mexico received and welcomed immigrants at the end of the 19th century and during the early 20th became more restrictive in the 1920s. Even in 1929, if I'm not mistaken, there was a new law that actually restricted 1927. There was a new law that restricted some ethnic groups and nationalities to migrate to Mexico, like the Chinese, the Indians, the Black Africans, and even Lebanese, Syrian, and other Middle Eastern communities. But this restriction only lasted for like a couple of years. And then a new change in the Mexican law in 1929 actually facilitated more the integration of immigrants by allowing them to become Mexican, to get the Mexican citizenship and have their spouses and have their children become Mexican. So that actually not only facilitated the integration of the Lebanese communities, but their assimilation to the Mexican society. So the struggles that went after the Mexican Revolution was like a period of peaks where immigration was restricted, but then some other facilities were given to these communities. And it's also an interesting time of history, because on the one hand, in Mexico there was this happening, but also in the Middle East, as you know, with the defeat of the Ottoman Empire after the Great War, First World War, Syria and Lebanon became French protectorates, and a new rise of these areas also facilitated the return of some immigrants to their own homeland. But that was part of it. On the one hand, the fluxes went back home, but also to Mexico and to other American countries where immigrants were actually moving. And now it was not because of the Ottoman repression or situation, but because of the networks that had already been settled between the Americas and Syria and Lebanon.
I want to go back to one thing that you mentioned. You talked about the new laws or rules in 1919 restricting immigration from certain places, and I immediately wondered whether there was backlash against the people that were already there, if there's starting to be sort of a mood that we don't want, these outsiders here. And then quite quickly after that, there was another movement which offered citizenship to these same groups. So that kind of very quick back and forth, did that create any kind of backlash or racism or tensions?
I don't think it became apparent with the Lebanese. At the time, given that Mexico was also coming out of a civil war, the Mexican Revolution, this nationalism meant that they wanted Mexican people for the jobs and restrict immigrants. And part of the Mexican Constitution that came out of after during the at the end of the revolution meant that in many cases you had to privilege Mexican citizens over foreigners. You had to privilege the Mexican ownership of lands, of natural resources, of all the resources of the country. So in that regard, they wanted to restrict workers, for example, the Chinese that came at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century to work on the railroad and some other ones, they were discriminated against at that time, for example, unlike the Lebanese, unlike the Spaniards, unlike other peoples. But that became something that was actually focused on people that were coming to Mexico at the time because of these networks and because of the crisis that followed the Mexican Revolution and that needed Mexican people to take over the jobs more than having a discrimination against the Lebanese or any other focused populations. Unfortunately, the Chinese were the ones that were discriminated against.
Martha, against the backdrop of all of this, the Lebanese people that were coming in, tell me a little bit about the communities that were created. And I'm imagining they're intra-Lebanese communities, but maybe not. Maybe they're mixed with other groups there. But what were the communities that evolved from that time period?
Okay, from the Lebanese community started organizing themselves, and there were okay, the most notorious were the religious ones, the Maronites, the Orthodox, the Druze, the Melkites, and of course, women have a very good place there. The first registration of an association that we have is the Assistential Ladies Union, and they were from all religions, and they started working together to make good to other persons. So this is the first registration, and there were many. The community tried to work together, but not always worked like as we want. And they were, I mean, then they were the Maronites, the Melkites, the Druzes, and all of them had their ladies communities, and they worked together. This is the first registration that we have. From that moment until now, they work together, and there is many movements of Lebanese people that worked, and they worked to promote and create. It was a dream, and now it's a reality. Many years ago until now, the Centro Libanés. Now there are Centro Libanés in Mexico City, in Mérida, Yucatán, in Puebla. There are several. And now there are all different associations. I mean, I can talk and I can go to the detail of all the associations that were created, but I mean, it's like another topic for another webinar, because there were like so much that began to work together. These are the principles. But now I can tell you that there are associations with professions. I mean, the doctors, the lawyers, the accountants. There is a cultural association which groups artists and writers and architects and many associations. And there is a monthly reunion because all of them work together to make different activities and to work to promote all of it. I mean, the Lebanese people work. They work here in Mexico to make very nice things. But there were many associations in the past of time, and I can go to the detail, but I don't want, because
Well,
it's
no, that's
like
true.
a very
That could
long.
be a whole thing in and of itself. But is there a lot of that seems to be about working together to create products or to work, and also to maybe maintain your Lebanese identity, by spending time with other Lebanese. What about the mixing that went on, or did it go on? What about the cultural integration in the beginning? Was it just really Lebanese peoples working and living together, or was there more of an integration, and how did that evolve?
Okay, at the beginning, there were Lebanese people working together. As the time has passed, the mixture has been evolving, and now you can see like I mean, you said you're Lebanese, but you have a Mexican spouse, and I mean here in Mexico they were mixing, and now you can see in the different associations you can see Lebanese people, but also Mexican. From the beginning, it was their objective to mix with the Mexican people. And as I was saying about the language, for example, they tried to speak more Spanish. For example, my family, my grandparents, they came from Lebanon, they speak in Arabic, but they said, "What our kids are gonna be like weird, no?" So they started talking in Spanish, and in that way, the language was a little bit lost in some families. But for example, my husband's parents, they came from Lebanon, and they decided that his children were going to learn Spanish in the school. So they talked Arabic, and now I have a husband that speaks perfect Arabic, and I hope my kids will. So they mix, and they work also, and the associations they have mixtures. At the beginning, there were Lebanese that started to work themselves together to mix with Mexican people. But as time has passed, you can see Lebanese and Mexicans and other people that are here in Mexico working together.
Um, Enrique, back to you, just because I'm aware each one of these topics we could talk about forever, so it's so hard to just skitter across the top of them. And we'll definitely have another webinar where we can go a little deeper. But Enrique, can you talk about, we touched on it earlier briefly, and perhaps off of what Martha just said about the industries that were created or nurtured by Lebanese people, what has been the impact? I don't want to say has been, because let's stay to the early years. What was the impact on the economy when this mass immigration started? And how does it unfold over time?
I think it evolved. At the beginning, as I said, these people that were actually favoring trade and the itinerary trade in different parts, uh, you have to remember that most of them were people with no university education or with any particular instruction. But as they were assimilated to the Mexican society, as they remained here, their children started going to school, integrating, learning Spanish, as Martha says. Then the next generation of Lebanese people became more educated. They started actually opening formal businesses. They started melting into every kind of profession in Mexico, whether it was in the industry, actors and actresses, in university professors, whatever profession you may imagine. There was a Lebanese, the son of a Lebanese immigrant, becoming an expert in that area. So at the beginning, the impact in the Mexican economy was probably not that important. But as the children, grandchildren of those Lebanese immigrants became part of the Mexican society, part of the business communities, of the industrials, and so on, the impact went higher. I don't think at the beginning it had a real effect, but what had an effect and something that contributed to the acceptance of the Lebanese and their assimilation to the Mexican society and the Mexican economy was also the fact that these people started, as Martha said, opening clubs, but at the beginning it was philanthropic societies, which contributed to the Mexican people, to the Mexican society, and that was something that was actually appreciated by the Mexicans. That's something that when you see that immigrant communities became part of the Mexican well-being and Mexican welfare by civil society, that's a point of break when they actually become more accepted and more appreciated by the society and by the Mexican let's say, born communities. And these changes affected positively, I would say, the Lebanese communities, the Spaniards, the Jewish communities, that also became part of this philanthropy, that became part of the industry, that became part of the everyday life, of the arts, of the culture. That's a point when you realize that these Lebanese have become Mexican, and these Jews have become Mexican. These Spaniards are now Mexican, even though they have networks that they can say, hey, my grandparents came from Biblos or from Santander or from Eastern Europe or somewhere else. And that's something that I think has characterized the immigrant communities in Mexico. There was a phrase that I read not long ago at the Lebanese Club in Mexico City, that they talk about that they define themselves as people with Lebanese blood and a Mexican heart.
Oh, I love that.
That actually describes them perfectly.
I love that. What a fabulous combination. I'm going to switch to our own wonderful Caroline now. The American University of Beirut's been around for 160 years, and 100 of those years has included a very rich relationship with Mexico. I did not realize the deep relationship between Latin America and AUB before I started. Caroline, could you talk a little bit about the origins of that relationship?
Sure. First of all, Amanda, I just want to thank you and your team for putting this wonderful webinar together. I also want to thank Martha and Enrique. When AUB first started its presence here in Latin America, you were amongst the first personalities that I visited. And I must say, as a Lebanese myself, I'm very proud, Martha, of what your father has created at the Lebanese Archive. And I'm so happy that you're here today. And Enrique, thank you for all the support that you give to Lebanon. And I must congratulate Enrique because now he will be the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Mexican Embassy in Bern, and he leaves next month. And one day, Enrique, when you become Mexico's ambassador to Lebanon, know that you have friends at AUB.
Inshallah, Mexican ambassador to Lebanon. And of course, our friends, my friends at AUB will always have a special place for me, definitely.
Thank you so much. So, and I also want to thank our archives department. We started our presence in Latin America last November. And so I'm based in Mexico City, and I report to our Senior Vice President of Advancement at AUB, Dr. Imad Balbaki. And this is all part of Dr. Khouri's, the President's global vision of expanding to Latin America to engage with our alumni, to engage with the vast diaspora, and to seek ways to collaborate and support. So when I first started this position, I went straight to the archives department at AUB, and I must give thanks to Ms. Samar Miati because I asked her, what do we have on Latin American AUB? We didn't know what to expect. But when she came back, we received a treasure trove of material of AUB's influence, AUB's alumni, and all of Latin America. And this could be separate webinar topics, but just for the purpose of today's topic, I will focus on Mexico. So thank you, Martha and Enrique, for providing a background just for the audience to understand. And where AUB plays in was that in the 1920s, due to the civil war in Mexico, the instability there, we see a lot of Maronite Christian families from the Ayub family, the Istvan, the Hnaini, Kayim, and the Shamut families from Chihuahua, Oaxaca, Torreon, and Mexico City. They all moved to AUB in the early 1920s, and most of them went into the freshman class. And we have records of them from our archives that they entered in 1924. There was this cross-transatlantic movement of these Mexican Lebanese going to AUB. We also have one personality that came up in our archives was Margaret Penrose. She was born and raised in, excuse me, Enrique, if I pronounce this wrong, but in Tamazunchale, Mexico, where her father, just like AUB, had created an American school for the indigenous Indians at the time. And she experienced the Mexican Revolution and had to flee This lady went on to become the wife of one of our presidents in 1950, Dr. Stephen Penrose. So she moved to Lebanon and to the campus in around 1950, and she even found a Spanish cook who could cook Mexican food for them on the campus. It's fascinating. Her children spoke Spanish, and she spoke Spanish where she could, but she grew up in Mexico. Now, this was the movement from Mexico to AUB. We start seeing movement from AUB to Mexico, which is fascinating. It's interesting to note where Mexico sent its sons to AUB to study. Really, the first AUB alumni who came to Mexico were the daughters, and especially from the nursing school. The first recorded alumna was a lady called Naziha Suede. She was a graduate of AUB's nursing school in 1913. During World War I, she worked with the American Red Cross. She was Syrian, so she worked at the government hospital in Damascus and at the government hospital in Beirut. Then we see in our records that she moved to Mexico in the early 1920s. And in conjunction with what you're saying of how Mexico treated immigrants, in 1936, in 1920, she moved to Mexico City, but in 1936, which is fascinating, she was appointed the head nurse of the American hospital at the Real de Monte Hidalgo. This is the earliest record that we have at AUB of a graduate working in Mexico. And this fits with what both Martha and Enrique said. Real de Monte is a mining town. There were a lot of miners from the US, from Europe, China, and it was an expat community, and Naziha was the head of nursing. She spoke English. She could, probably she was chosen because she had her language abilities and her medical abilities. Another lady was Angelique Jamal, also nursing, 1921. She came to AUB and came to Mexico from AUB, worked and lived in Mexico City at the government hospitals. So these were two ladies at the beginning. The first transfer of AUB education to Mexico was really in medicine and nursing. Another prominent personality was Dr. William Name. He was the president of the Mexican chapter of gastroenterology in the 1930s. He collaborated with the Mexican government, and he was also a poet. So while he was in Mexico, he wrote a poem to King George V of the United Kingdom, and he responded to him in a letter. Again, this is all from our archives. Another gentleman was Dr. David Haj, also practiced medicine and surgery in Mexico City from 1925 onward. These were the medics and the nurses. And I must say something that was, you both mentioned, where most of the immigrants to Mexico from Lebanon and Syria were Maronite Christians or Christians. Very interestingly, these early alumna that came from AUB were Druze and Muslims and Christians, and there were some Jewish as well. So it's fascinating the maybe this migration pattern. Different group of people are industrialists. Najib Dabari, he was one of the most successful. He was a class of 1924. He had a very successful textile industry. He owned a silk factory and racehorses here in Mexico City. And he was actually one of the first donors to AUB to support students with a $200 gift back in 1950. Then we have another gentleman, Adel Dia Hamzawi, businessman, also very successful. And then Ramesh Hadi, he owned a carpet factory, and he was a gentleman who started the AUB alumni branch in Mexico in 1950. Now, to give you the numbers, over the years, the Mexican alumni since the 1920s till the 1960s, there were probably just around 7 or 8. Today, we have close to 20 alumni throughout Mexico. If we move through into the 9th, there's so much material to cover, so I'm going to be as fast as I can. I'm covering a century. 1940s and 50s, UNAM asked Dr. William Name if he could go and launch academic ties with the universities in Damascus, Baghdad, Cairo, and at AUB. And so Dr. Nami from Mexico went and visited many universities, including AUB, on behalf of UNAM. Also, UNAM reached out to Mr. Ramiz Shehadi and asked him to write an article about UNAM. And so Mr. Shehadi went and did an article, and this was in 1952, talking about the University City of Mexico City, 2-page article, and even talked about how the secretary of the rector was Lebanese and served Turkish coffee. So yeah, beautiful stories. Very, very fascinating. We move on to AUB's Agriculture Research and Education Center, 1956, AREC. We hosted many students in the Bekaa Valley, which is a little satellite campus that we have outside of the main campus in Beirut for agriculture. We hosted many Mexican students from the agriculture discipline. And fascinatingly, after that, the center, CIMIT in Mexico, the Center for the Improvement of Wheat and Maize, they had a very strong collaboration, which I will get to in a minute. We had professors during the 1950s come for various, excuse me, various conferences. And then we had in Lebanon, Dr. Rodolfo Usigli. He was Mexico's minister to Lebanon. He donated 18 volumes of Spanish literature to Jafet Library to mark the centennial of Mexico's 1857 Constitution. And I had the pleasure of meeting his son at the exhibition that we all held together, Martha, Enrique, and AUB at the Lebanese Club. It was a good conversation. Now, moving on to the agricultural aspect. AUB in 1968 developed a wheat variety that doubled yields with half the seed rate. And so this was covered globally by global press in 1968, the New York Times, ABC News, and so forth. It was actually CIMIT in Mexico that conducted the first field trials of this Najah wheat that was developed at AUB. So alongside the World Health Organization and USAID, it was CIMIT in Mexico City that tested the sweet product. At CIMIT, we see a very continuous string of AUB alumni, starting with Dr. Hikmat Nasser, agricultural expert in the 1960s. He joined from AUB. He joined Mexico's agricultural network, followed by Dr. Hannibal Mukhtar. He also served at CIMIT, coming from AUB to Mexico City. And then currently, one of our current and very active alumna, Dr. Mireille Khairallah, I believe she's on this webinar. She also worked at CIMIT, continuing this collaboration. Back on campus, we had many sort of visitors. We had Mexican architect Felix Candela. We had Dr. Bernardo Reyes, Mexican ambassador, who also provided many volumes of the publications from the UNAM University. Moving on into the 80s, the Lebanese Civil War, not much was going on, but we had many of our professors attend conventions and conferences in Mexico, in the health sciences, in agriculture, and in psychology. As we enter the 2000s, we see more visitors from Mexico, Mexican architect Miguel Adria, Manuel Alvarez, Alvarez Fuentes, who gave public lectures at AUB. The Lebanese Mexican businessman Carlos Slim also delivered a keynote on the new civilization of knowledge and technology, which was very popular, and it filled out the hall. Also, actress Salma Hayek visited in the same year the Children's Cancer Center of Lebanon. The Lebanese ambassador, the Mexican ambassador to Lebanon at the time, Jose Ignacio Madrazo Bolivar, also had a lecture. Moving up to today, 2023, AUB signed a collaboration agreement with Colmex And the actual president today is also a friend of AUB, and she's visited the AUB campus several times. This is all in a nutshell. The material is rich. There is so much to talk about. At the same time, when Ramesh Shahadu was creating this alumni group here in Mexico, it was at the same time, concurrently, we had 180 alumni in Brazil who are also creating their association. But this topic, we can leave it for another time, because Brazil and AUB includes an emperor, an alumni, and a golden jubilee, but we can leave this for another topic. So we're happy to continue AUB's collaboration in Mexico. We have a very substantial group of alums throughout Latin America, but in Mexico, I've all had the pleasure of meeting them all. And this was 100 years, basically, in a nutshell, Amanda. I hope I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Thank you, Caroline. That's certainly a lot of information. And, you know, as I said, everything we've touched upon today, I feel like could definitely do its own hour, at least. So thank you so much for that. And with the apologies of sort of rushing through this, I do want to get to some Q&As, because some questions have come in. So I'm just going to, and also I just wanted to mention that the archives that Caroline was talking about, you can see a lot of that on our website, which we'll provide a link to at the end. So you can explore that for yourselves to some extent.
So fascinating. Yeah.
Yes. So some questions that have come in. Number one, given Lebanon's crises today, does Mexico still have a sizable number of Lebanese people immigrating to Mexico? Is it increasing during these times?
If I may, just looking at the AUB alumni, we have a very distinguished and established group of older alumni currently in Mexico, but we are receiving quite a good group of younger alumni from the 2000s, the classes of the 2000s arriving. And we see this in Panama as well. We see a lot of alums in Panama from the younger generations. This is from the perspective at AUB.
Thank you. But Martha and Enrique, do you see Lebanese people coming to, is there another wave? Is there more Lebanese people coming to Mexico?
No, I don't think so. At the moment, I don't think there are any flows of Lebanese immigrants. The last flow of immigrants that came to Mexico from Lebanon happened in the 1970s due to the civil war in Lebanon. But at the moment, I don't think there is this phenomenon going on. Of course, there's always the family networks and so on, but surprisingly, there is a Mexican community in Lebanon, which is, I would say, quite large by the standards of the number of Mexicans that live in the Middle East. And they are all descendants of Mexican Lebanese that actually returned to Lebanon and live there, and they hold the Mexican citizenship. But even in these times of economic and political crisis, or even conflict in Lebanon, they have not sought to migrate to Mexico, even those ones.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do we have a sense of how many people live today throughout Mexico, or who are of Lebanese descent? I know not a number, but like a percentage. And I have a follow-up question to that.
Here in Mexico now, it seems like 500,000 or 600,000,
Wow.
more or less. That's the number. So it's a big community.
Wow.
Yeah. Of what I read, it goes even larger than 600,000 people of Lebanese descent in Mexico. There are several sources.
It's probably difficult to calculate because it's, you know, I imagine people are very mixed now. So it's about how you identify, right? Sometimes immigrant communities lose their connection to their place of origin throughout the generations. Of course, that happens all over the world. Do you feel that Lebanese Mexicans, it seems to me, and it might be biased, but it seems to me that the Lebanese hang on tighter. Do you feel that the Lebanese Mexicans still have a strong connection to Lebanon, perhaps different than other communities?
Okay. You can I think it's a subjective questions because
Yes, of course.
it is like how you have been living. I feel a strong connection, of course, and I work with several persons and have friends that have a strong connection. I think we are the guardians, and we should develop that connection. It's our obligation to talk to our children about that. I think I know persons that have lost that connection, but most of the community and in Central Lebanese and everything, we work to continue feeling that and feeling that identity. And for me, my answer will be no. I don't feel I have lost that connection, and I know several persons that haven't, but there are some that have. I mean, it's subjective to answer that,
Of
but
course.
we
I
are a
meant sort of
community that
in
keeps on
general.
working on the connection.
But it's interesting to know just from my conversations with the diaspora that having a Lebanese great grandparent, they always highlight that fact, even though they're probably married into different nationalities. Saying that you're Lebanese in Mexico is a source of prestige, that you are successful, that you have done well, that you are proud of your origins. And you hear this often that they are proud to say that they have this one Lebanese great grandparent.
I love that. Enrique, did you have anything to add before we sum this up?
Absolutely. I think that the best example is that these people went on from being poor immigrants with no instruction or poor education to become a successful community that actually encompasses what you can do if you actually aim at a specific goal. And I think that's the sense of this prestige of saying I'm part of the Lebanese community in Mexico, because that's a story of success in immigration. And I think that makes it special and lovely, I would say.
I'm sorry, but thank you, Enrique, for saying that. I am really proud because he has all the reason. It's a very working community. He said that we well our they started as vendors and they charge, no, like you can pay me next week and next week and next week. And now we have a very wealthy community. Not only I'm not talking just in
Not
the
only.
economics, but it's a very wealthy community in culture and in values, you know. I mean, they worked a lot, and I feel really proud of being Lebanese and also, of course, being Mexican. But yes, they did a great job, and it's, I mean, what Caroline said, it's prestige to be Lebanese here in Mexico. No, I whenever I say I'm Lebanese, it's like, oh, great, and people is excited about this.
One former president of Mexico, Adolfo López Mateos, he actually said when he inaugurated the Lebanese Club of Mexico City, he said to the audience, anyone who does not have a Lebanese friend must look for one. And
that's true.
Signifies
True.
relationship between the Lebanese and Mexico, and how much the Lebanese community are grateful to Mexico for opening their doors way back when, during a famine and during a world war and during civil wars. The Lebanese are always very grateful to Mexico for opening their doors and welcoming them and making them their own.
Thank you so much. I'll always remember the Lebanese by blood and with a Mexican heart. What did you say, Enrique? What was the expression?
People with the Lebanese blood and the Mexican heart.
Yeah, I love that. So thank you all again. There's so much more we could discuss, and hopefully there will be other webinars. Many people have been writing in asking for ways to get more information, and so we will have a page on our website where we will have links to this recording and to some additional information. We'll also send an email around, so hopefully, we'll be able to get those things to you. And I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us for this Deb Center event. The Deb Center is, for those of you who don't know, is the New York hub of North American operations for American University of Beirut, where we work to expand the university's global outreach. So thank you all for joining this event, and we hope you'll join us for more. I'm going to, if I can do it. share my screen here for a minute and just go over a couple final notes. You will receive a follow-up email in the next day or two with a link to the video from the event and additional resources, as I mentioned. Please visit the image gallery on our website. That's got pictures of the archival materials that Caroline was talking about. And this exhibit was based on one currently on display at the Jaffet Library in AUB in Lebanon. So definitely check that out. The link is right there on your screen, but will also be sent in an email. And for more information about AUB's Latin American office, alumni events, and AUB educational opportunities for Latin America, and for prospective students, please reach out to Caroline, who you met here. Her information is also up here and will be in the email. And finally, please feel free to respond to the email we send you with any thoughts as to what topics you may be interested in learning more about in future webinars. We would love your suggestions and to hear what interests you the most. So that's it for us. Thank you, Enrique. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Caroline. We're very grateful. And thank you all so much for spending part of your day with us.